Katana is the best sword in the world. Katanas are so strong. A katana never dulls. A katana blade can't break. You can't compete with a samurai sword. Katanas are the most effective weapon. Okay, we need to talk. If you still think that drawing a katana produces that famous legendary sound, maybe it's time to revise your basics. And you're in luck, because today we're gonna bust all the myths surrounding one of the world's most iconic weapons, the katana. As fascinating as it is, the katana is also wrapped in a mountain of legends and cliches, all blown up by pop culture, movies, series, manga, and video games. The katana is at the heart of so many misconceptions that it's hard to keep track. So, if you want to know what really lies behind this legendary sword, then stick with us. Let's set the record straight and demystify the katana once and for all. But before we dive in, make sure to subscribe and hit that like button if you want to support us. Alright, let's get started. This is probably the most overused cliche out there. People love to think of katanas as the sharpest swords in the world, capable of slicing through rocks, cutting the air, or cleaving through armor with a single strike, even cutting through another sword. You see this all the time in anime, where katanas are portrayed as these insanely overpowered weapons that nothing can withstand. But the truth is, when you look a little closer, the reality is far from that. Indeed, studies have shown that the most common injuries on the battlefield were to the neck, arms, or hands, rarely to the torso, which was well protected by metal plates. Plates that even a katana couldn't just slice through like butter. There's a reason samurais wore armor. It was damn good at keeping them alive. The problem with this fantasy about the katana's legendary sharpness is that even if we know it's exaggerated, people still cling to the idea that there must be some truth to it. But here's the deal. No matter how mythical the katana is, it's still just a piece of metal, more or less sharp. If you try to slice through a metal bar with a katana, or vice versa, chances are your katana's blade is going to come out pretty banged up. Worst case, the blade could even snap in two. NANI? So if you don't want to find yourself in the same situation, opt for one of our katanas instead. But let's not get it twisted. Saying the katana doesn't deserve its reputation as a razor-sharp blade would be straight up false. Because, let's be real, the blacksmiths during the Edo period were not messing around. These guys were literally in competition to create the sharpest blade in history. And when I say competition, I mean real cutting tests. Now, you might be wondering, what did they test katanas on? Bamboo? Too basic. Tatami mats? Not exciting enough. How about testing on real people? Yeah, that's right. During the Tamashigiri era, katanas were tested on captured enemies, condemned criminals, and sometimes even unlucky passersby who just happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. Without any bad puns, I bet you're dying to know how this went down, so I'll quickly explain. First, the body was securely tied up, often on a mound of sand, held in place by bamboo. Then they'd stack the bodies on top of each other to see how many torsos the katana could slice through in one go. Yeah, it was as grim as it sounds. These cutting contests could skyrocket the value of a blade if it proved to be a real killer. And what happened if a sword wasn't sharp enough? Some forgers completely hardcore would go as far as committing seppuku out of shame. In short, the katana wasn't just a sword, it was an obsession, a blade that has driven many to madness. And if you thought those cutting contests were wild, wait until you hear what's next. In 1815, a guy named Yamada Asaemon Yoshitoshi wrote a book called Kaiho Kenjaku. This book is basically a catalog of the sharpest blades ever tested on human bodies during the Edo period. Suffice it to say that this book, which is the cause of so many deaths, could have rivaled the Death Note. Imagine 180 katanas sifted through, and the best of them received the honorary title of Owazamono, literally excellent. But there was an even higher level, the legendary Saijo Owazamono, meaning supreme grade, the top of the most fearsome swords in Japanese history. Let's take a concrete example, a katana forged by Master Nagasone Kotetsu, who we'll talk about in another video. This man was so respected that his blades bore gold inscriptions on the nakago, the metal part hidden in the handle. These inscriptions didn't just shine, they documented everything: the date of the test, the name of the tester, and the cutting results. Pure artistry. But keep in mind that these exceptional katanas, impressive as they are, don't represent the norm. Cutting tests were carried out under ideal conditions, often on immobile targets. In other words, these blades were not put to the test in the chaos of real combat. So yes, these results are spectacular, but they need to be put into context. By the way, let us know in the comments what myths you've heard about the katana. As we've seen before, the katana is often portrayed as the ultimate weapon, with legendary sharpness and strength. This myth doesn't just come from stories and pop culture, but also from one of the materials used to forge the blade, tamahagane. Tamahagane is often hyped as the best steel for crafting a sharp and durable blade, but what people don't tell you is that this steel is far from perfect. In fact, it's quite the opposite. It's loaded with impurities, and finding high-quality tamahagane is a real challenge. This steel, derived from iron sand found in Japanese rivers and coastal areas, is so impure that Japanese blacksmiths had to get creative to make anything worthwhile out of it. But those Japanese artisans weren't just going to throw in the towel. Faced with this often low-quality material, they developed ingenious forging techniques. They folded and refolded the steel dozens, even hundreds of times, not just for kicks, but to eliminate impurities and create a more uniform metal. By doing this, they managed to turn a mediocre material into a formidable blade. However, the quality of tamahagane varied considerably depending on where it came from, and this had a direct impact on the quality of the katana blade. But the blacksmiths didn't stop there. They combined tamahagane with other steels or used specific techniques to compensate for the weaknesses of the material. They knew how to make the most of what they had. In the end, tamahagane, often presented as the perfect steel for its toughness and cutting performance, is far from ideal. In fact, today we can create steels that are much stronger and sharper, like T10 steel or 1095 steel. But even though the katana was forged from less than perfect steel, it was the skill of Japanese artisans that made all the difference. Their ability to turn a weakness into a strength is what made the katana legendary, despite the challenges posed by tamahagane. If I say katana, there's a good chance the first thing that comes to your mind is samurai. Indeed, this sword is often seen as the ultimate weapon of these Japanese warriors, a symbol of their power and honor. But what if I told you it was all a lie? Let me explain. Historically, samurai only drew their katana as a last resort. In fact, the katana was rarely depicted in battle illustrations, and for good reason. On the battlefield, samurai preferred far more effective weapons like the bow, called yumi, the spear, yari, or the halberd, naginata. These weapons had greater reach, range, and striking power than the katana, which, despite its intimidating appearance, wasn't the first choice unless you felt like taking on your enemies in hardcore mode. The katana stayed in its sheath until all other options were exhausted. It was only in close combat, or maybe to finish off a defeated enemy, that it became useful. In short, the katana was very much a secondary weapon. It was only during the Edo era, a period of peace before Japan's Industrial Revolution, that the katana took on a new role. With other weapons of war put aside, the katana became more than just a combat tool. It evolved into a cultural symbol, a daily accessory that samurai carried with pride, whether for a casual stroll or self-defense when needed. Beyond the katana's association with the samurai, which is only partially true, the katana was far from being a noble and honorable weapon in its early days. And let's bust another myth while we're at it. The myth that a samurai who loses his katana on the battlefield condemns his family to a 10-generation curse is completely false. The real emblem of the elite warrior class was the tachi, a majestic and refined sword that was the pride of mounted warriors, a true symbol of their high rank. Meanwhile, the katana was just a secondary weapon, often reserved for foot soldiers. The katana wasn't even close to the legendary blade we think of today. They often took the form of naginata, rudimentary blades mass-produced for infantry use. These were disposable weapons that were easily recycled. In contrast, the tachi was carried with pride by cavalry, forged with meticulous care, and exuded quality and class. It wasn't until much later that the katana rose in status, becoming a quality weapon adopted by high-ranking warriors. But let's be clear, the current popularity of the katana and its association with samurai only tells a small part of its story. As we've already discussed, the myth of the katana as the emblematic weapon of the samurai took shape mainly during the Edo era. Before this period, during Japan's Great Civil Wars, samurai and conscripts primarily relied on other weapons. Even peasants conscripted into battle could end up with a katana in their hands, which is far from the heroic and exclusive image we attribute to it today. Samurai wielded katanas more out of pragmatism than symbolism, and often preferred to loot armor rather than swords, their priority being to stay alive. Over time, katanas became so widespread in feudal Japan that after the victory of the Tokugawa clan, katanagari operations or sword hunts were launched to disarm civilians, thus reserving possession of katanas exclusively for samurai. It was this movement that truly cemented the katana as a symbol of the elite warriors, and from that point on, the image of the katana as a legendary weapon began to deeply root itself in Japanese culture. I've lost count of how many times I've seen people carrying their katana the wrong way. But did you know that the way you carry a katana actually holds a secret to combat effectiveness? If these legendary swords are designed with the edge facing upward, it's not just for style. There's a very specific reason. It allows the samurai to draw and strike in one smooth, fluid motion. Picture this, you encounter an enemy in a dark alley, and in the blink of an eye, the katana is drawn, the attack launched straight for the opponent's head. This technique, perfect for fighting on foot, made each movement faster, more precise, and most importantly, deadlier. By comparison, the tachi, the ancestor of the katana, was carried differently, with the sharp blade pointing downwards. Why this difference? It's all about context. The tachi, with its more pronounced curvature starting near the hilt, was designed for mounted combat. By carrying the tachi with the edge down, the rider could draw and strike his enemy's head, often positioned lower down, in a fluid movement while remaining firmly in the saddle. Suspended by rings, the tachi was perfect for this equestrian combat technique, while the katana was optimized for duels on foot. These small details, which might seem insignificant, show just how much thought went into maximizing combat effectiveness. So the next time you see someone carrying their katana backwards, you'll know why it's a mistake. The katana is often seen as a weapon of lightning-fast speed. The idea that you can draw, strike, and take down an enemy in a single swift motion is widespread. Many believe it's because the katana is lighter than other swords, which in our imagination are heavy and cumbersome. And honestly, that's not surprising when you look at how swords are often portrayed in movies and video games. But in reality, when you compare the katana to other swords of similar size, you'll find that the weight is almost the same. Two-handed swords, like long swords, were actually quite thin and weighed much less than people think, rarely exceeding 3 kilograms. And while we're talking weight, it's the same story with one-handed swords. Many assume they're more maneuverable, fast, and agile, while two-handed swords are seen as brute force weapons. But here's the twist, it's actually the opposite. Because the weight of a one-handed sword is distributed over just one arm, you'll need more strength to wield it. In the art of swordsmanship, speed isn't just about weight, it's also about balance, which means how the weight is distributed between the handle and the blade. The earliest katanas weren't as well balanced as those forged during the Edo period. Thankfully, the katana evolved over time, and many of these changes were all about improving balance, just like what happened with Western swords and other types of blades. There's no perfect balance when it comes to swords. If a sword's balance is too close to the handle, it'll be easier to maneuver, but you'll lose cutting power. On the other hand, if the balance is closer to the tip, the sword will be more effective at cutting, but slower to move. It's always a trade-off. The key takeaway here is that the katana isn't inherently faster than any other sword. It has its strengths and weaknesses, but its true power also depends on the person wielding it. Does that mean we can call the katana a bad sword? Absolutely not. The katanas have definitely earned their reputation as legendary blades. Their design, sharpness, and rich history make them fascinating weapons. But as we've seen, their characteristics are often exaggerated, sometimes even bordering on the mythical. It's crucial to remember that behind every myth, there's a much more nuanced reality. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the world of katanas and want to learn more about the truths and legends surrounding these iconic weapons, don't forget to like this video, and to make sure you don't miss out on our future explorations of Japanese swords and other exciting topics, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. I'll see you in the next video.